My breath caught sharply as I unfolded the letter hidden between the pages of the worn-out novel he'd returned yesterday. His handwriting unmistakably neat, yet somehow hurried, as if capturing thoughts he'd long held back. Claire. The letter began softly, intimately, addressing me directly for the first time after all these silent years. I've loved you quietly, carefully, and from afar. If only I had met you sooner. Before duty, before family, before it was too late. I wonder what we might have become. My heartbeat quickened painfully, fingertips tracing the ink as though touching the unspoken truth behind his cautious smiles, his frequent visits, his carefully maintained distance. Had I been blind or simply afraid? What do you do when the right person arrives a lifetime too late? Have you ever found a love you couldn't reach for, yet couldn't let go? Cape Elizabeth was a place where life moved gently, guided by the rhythm of tides rather than clocks, where neighbors waved with genuine smiles, and where evenings drifted quietly into soft, misty nights. It was in this small coastal town, nestled along the rugged shoreline of Maine, that Claire Sullivan had carved out her corner of the world, a cozy bookstore named Whispering Pages, tucked between an old bakery and a flower shop that always smelled faintly of lavender. At 45, Claire seemed content, offering soft smiles to customers, gently rearranging novels with faded covers, and brewing tea each morning, the comforting scent of Earl Grey weaving into her days like a reassuring melody. Yet beneath her quiet routines, her life hid deeper currents. Quiet regrets and tender hopes she rarely allowed herself to speak aloud. She'd been alone since her divorce 6 years ago, accepting solitude as gracefully as one accepts the slow, changing of seasons, yet always aware of an emptiness lingering in the quiet moments. Her only child, Abby, grown and off to college, knew little of Claire's hidden longings. The letters she'd penned late at night and never sent, carefully, tucked beneath her bed in a wooden box, holding secrets that she both cherished and feared. But lately, something had shifted. Claire often found herself pausing near the old radio, listening to faint static between notes of familiar classical pieces, as though the distant signal were trying to speak directly to her loneliness. Her heart carried an invisible weight, something about missed chances, about love that had arrived quietly but too late to claim. Every first Wednesday of the month, Claire anticipated Henry's visits to the store. A gentle man with thoughtful eyes and a careful smile, who would browse quietly, yet seemed always searching for more than books. Their conversations stayed polite, the unsaid words heavy between them, questions left unanswered, lingering looks, loaded with meaning. It was only after he'd left that Claire allowed herself to imagine how life might have been, had circumstances been kinder or timing more forgiving. Sometimes, standing by the window as evening fell softly over the town, Claire wondered if others felt the same quiet ache, a yearning for a love that existed only in silent possibilities. Did anyone else carry unsent letters, hidden beneath their own beds, speaking truths they'd never dare voice aloud? Have you ever lived a story you wished you could rewrite, even knowing the ending might remain just as uncertain? It was an ordinary morning when the parcel arrived at Whispering Pages, the sky outside gently overcast, as though the weather itself understood Claire's subtle melancholy. She had been absorbed in sorting books when the postman tapped quietly on the window, waving warmly as he always did. Claire opened the door, breathing in the crisp, salty air that mingled with the faint scent of lavender from next door. "Morning." "Claire," he greeted, handing her a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. "This one's got your name, no return address. Secret admirer, maybe?" he added with a friendly wink. Claire smiled politely, accepting it without expectation, thinking it likely another publisher's sample. Yet as she stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind her, an inexplicable chill tingled softly down, her spine unsettling yet curiously inviting, as though the small parcel held more than just pages and ink. Settling at the counter, She carefully peeled away the brown wrapping, revealing a worn novel bound in faded blue leather. Henry's novel, Echoes in Autumn, published nearly 10 years earlier, a modest print run that had quietly slipped into obscurity. She turned it over slowly, the old cover feeling strangely intimate beneath her fingertips, as though she were touching a hidden part of his past. But why had this copy found its way here, to her? She opened the cover gently, breathing in the delicate scent of aged paper, and there, written in Henry's careful, familiar handwriting, was an inscription that caught her breath. For Claire, even if she never reads this. Claire felt her heart stutter, a slow realization dawning. He had known her name even before their first awkward meeting at the bookstore years later. 1,000 questions raced through her mind, whispering doubts, hidden hopes, and long-buried desires. When had he written this? And how had it remained, hidden from her, silently existing as a testament to feelings never spoken? She flipped carefully through the pages, feeling each turn as though turning back time itself, her heart quickening with each subtle underline, each note he'd made in the margins. And then, folded neatly between chapters 5 and 6, a letter slipped gently into her lap. A folded sheet of cream paper, delicate and weighty all at once. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, sensing instinctively that these words were meant for her, though they'd never reached their destination until now. The letter began softly, tenderly. Claire, it feels strange writing this letter you'll never read, yet somehow it gives me comfort. I see you often through the window of your store, arranging books, lost in thought, and I find myself wondering about your story. Sometimes life presents us with quiet miracles, yet also cruel ironies. To meet someone who feels immediately familiar, who occupies our thoughts, yet arrives too late? Is that not the cruelest irony of all? Claire paused, breath tight in her chest, her eyes moistening as she read on, hearing Henry's gentle voice, clearly in each carefully penned sentence. I often imagine what it would have been like had we crossed paths years ago. Would our laughter have mingled easily over cups of tea? Would your hand have found mine naturally on cold winter walks? I know it's foolish, but these thoughts persist, refusing to let go. Perhaps that's why I'm writing, to release them somehow, to let this feeling exist somewhere outside myself, even if only on paper. The bookstore had grown silent around her, the ticking of the small antique clock the only sound, marking time, as Claire's heart absorbed each new revelation. Every word felt like a gentle collision, reshaping her understanding of Henry, shifting their polite distance into something deeper, something achingly real. She saw now how their cautious exchanges and lingering looks had been more than mere coincidences. They'd been silent conversations, held back by circumstance and duty. You must never read this, the letter continued, the handwriting now slightly hurried, as though emotions had overtaken caution. But if you ever do, know that you are seen, truly seen by someone who cares deeply, even if silently. We may never have our own story, but the possibility of what could have been will forever belong to us. Claire folded the letter slowly, pressing it gently against her chest, her heartbeat resonating with a bittersweet rhythm of hope and regret. She'd been blind, perhaps intentionally, ignoring the quiet truths hidden behind Henry's careful smiles, afraid of disturbing the fragile balance they'd maintained. Yet now, with his secret words finally revealed, she couldn't deny the stirring ache deep inside, nor the quiet voice whispering the question she'd tried so long to silence. Had she missed her chance, or had fate simply conspired against them? Standing there, holding the novel and letter, Claire felt herself at the edge of something undefined yet profound, a tender crossroads between what had been and what might still be. She looked out the window again, watching the wind gently stir the lavender blossoms, feeling both vulnerable and strangely comforted, as though Henry had reached through time itself to touch her loneliness. And for the first time in years, Claire allowed herself to imagine openly. What if this quiet revelation was only the beginning? She never expected the truth would begin with a forgotten letter. Have you ever discovered a love that was waiting quietly, just beyond reach? The days following the discovery of Henry's hidden letter felt unreal, like Claire was suspended in a gentle fog of half-dreams. Her world subtly shifted, but not fully changed. Each morning, she awoke with a quiet ache, a persistent thought that perhaps things weren't as settled as she'd long convinced herself. She began to question everything: the polite distance they'd always maintained, the gentle smiles exchanged across the bookstore, and even her own carefully managed heart. She found herself watching the door each morning, anticipating his quiet entrance, her pulse quickening at every jingle of the chime, only to deflate slightly when other customers appeared. Claire had always taken comfort in certainty, the soft predictability of routines. Yet now, uncertainty whispered promises she couldn't ignore, offering dreams of possibilities that felt simultaneously thrilling and frightening. On the following Wednesday, precisely at 10, the bell jingled softly, and Henry stepped inside, hesitating briefly in the doorway, as though sensing the subtle change in atmosphere. Their eyes met across the quiet store, a gentle current passing silently between them. "Morning, Claire," he said, voice low, kind and familiar, yet suddenly loaded with unspoken meanings. He paused slightly, observing her with careful concern. "Is everything all right?" Claire felt a flutter of panic rise in her chest, her fingers unconsciously tracing the counter's edge. "Of course," she answered softly, smiling in a way that felt a little less convincing than usual. "It's just been a busy week." Henry nodded gently, his thoughtful gaze lingering on her a moment longer than usual, as though searching for something in her expression. He moved towards the shelves slowly, seemingly more hesitant than normal, fingers brushing carefully over titles he had surely seen countless times before. Watching him, Claire wondered if he too felt this invisible shift between them, the subtle dance of acknowledgement mixed with cautious avoidance. She wondered if perhaps he sensed somehow that the words he'd penned years ago had finally found their way to her, reshaping their careful silences into something more vulnerable. When Henry approached the counter holding a slim volume, Claire felt her heart quicken slightly, an old nervousness tinged with excitement, reminiscent of feelings she'd long thought herself incapable of experiencing again. As she took the book from him, their fingers brushed lightly, a fleeting touch, barely noticeable, yet charged with quiet intensity. Her breath caught subtly, and she forced herself to look into his eyes. In that moment, she saw mirrored uncertainty and vulnerability, feelings he'd carefully hidden behind layers of polite conversation. "Claire," Henry began quietly, carefully choosing his words, "I wonder if you'd like to join me for coffee this afternoon. There's something I've been meaning to share with you." She hesitated, heart racing at the gentleness and honesty in his request, yet the fears she'd held for years rushed back. The responsibility of family, the unspoken boundaries they'd silently respected. Still, beneath her hesitation lay a yearning, too strong to deny, a need to finally understand the truth they'd both been quietly avoiding. "I'd like that," she finally said softly, feeling a strange relief, as if she'd just stepped out onto a narrow bridge that stretched uncertainly into the mist, yet knowing she could no longer remain on familiar shores. Hours later, sitting across from Henry at a small cafe overlooking the harbor, Claire traced the rim of her coffee cup, the warmth grounding her as she listened quietly. He spoke softly of his family, his life, and the years spent balancing love, duty, and regret. Finally, after a gentle pause, he reached into his jacket pocket, carefully withdrawing a small photograph, edges worn from years spent hidden away. "This," he said softly, handing it to her, "was taken exactly 10 years ago here in town, the very day I bought your novel from your store before you ever knew my name." Claire's breath hitched slightly as she stared at the photograph. It was an image of herself, captured unknowingly, standing near the window of whispering pages, absorbed in arranging books. Her heart ached, caught between astonishment and a strange tenderness at this tangible evidence of Henry's quiet, hidden affection. "I didn't know how to approach you," he confessed quietly, eyes focused on the table, voice tinged with gentle regret. "Life moved forward, and I allowed myself to believe it was best left unspoken. But seeing you every month, pretending to search for novels I already owned, became the most comforting and painful routine of my life." Claire raised her gaze to meet his, finally seeing clearly what she'd always felt beneath their careful exchanges: loneliness matched by yearning, love held back by responsibility and timing. Tears welled softly, unshed yet unmistakable in her eyes. "I never imagined," she whispered, voice catching, "that anyone could feel such things for me, silently and from afar." Henry smiled gently, sadness and affection blending beautifully in his expression. "I wondered so many times how you'd react if you knew," he admitted, voice almost a whisper, eyes glistening with unshed emotion. "But there was never a right moment." As Claire studied the photograph once more, seeing her younger self, unaware of the quiet love observing her from afar, she felt profoundly shaken, yet deeply comforted. Henry had known her, seen her clearly, even from a distance. She realized suddenly, achingly, that love didn't require grand gestures or perfect timing. It existed in quiet, persistent truths that waited patiently to be revealed. When Henry finally reached across the table, gently resting his hand atop hers, Claire felt both comfort and sorrow, knowing clearly, in this tender silence, that their chance had slipped quietly away, leaving only these fragile revelations between them. "Claire," he began softly, carefully, "if we had found each other earlier, do you think we would have been brave enough to choose differently?" His question lingered gently in the air, unanswered, a tender ache suspended between them, leaving Claire silently wishing she could rewrite time itself. Have you ever wondered how your life might have changed if the truth had reached you just a little sooner? In the days after their quiet revelation at the cafe, Claire found herself caught in a delicate balance, living somewhere between newfound truths and carefully maintained illusions. Every interaction with Henry now felt heavier, more poignant, as though each brief conversation held an entire lifetime of words left unspoken. They continued to meet casually. Polite encounters in the bookstore, careful smiles exchanged from across rooms, yet beneath this gentle facade, a quiet, undeniable tension simmered. Claire's nights grew restless, haunted by thoughts of Henry's photograph, the handwritten inscription, and the quiet sincerity in his eyes. She would lie awake in her small bedroom, staring up at shadows dancing across the ceiling, replaying their conversations, searching for hidden meanings she'd previously overlooked. Her dreams became fragmented, filled with glimpses of what might have been warm afternoons spent hand in hand, quiet laughter shared openly without caution or fear. As weeks turned slowly into autumn, Claire began to notice a subtle distance forming between herself and the people who'd long filled her life. Conversations with Maggie felt strained, filled with pauses as Claire carefully guarded her heart, hesitant to share the secret truths that had changed everything. Even Abby, who often sensed her mother's emotions intuitively, seemed puzzled by Claire's newfound quietude. Yet, amid this solitude, Claire found unexpected comfort in Henry's quiet presence. Their meetings became a delicate refuge, moments stolen from their separate worlds to briefly exist in a gentle reality where the lines between friendship and love blurred softly. They talked about books and poetry, music and memories, carefully skirting around the deeper truths they both understood but dared not fully acknowledge. One evening, as the bookstore closed and twilight painted the sky in soft shades of lilac and gold, Henry lingered longer than usual, standing near the window, hands resting gently on the sill, eyes distant. Claire watched him silently, her heart aching quietly at the sight of his unguarded sadness. "You seem far away tonight," she said softly, stepping closer, feeling the quiet energy shift subtly around them. Henry glanced toward her, offering a small, tired smile. "Sometimes, standing here with you, I let myself forget," he admitted quietly, his voice tinged with gentle resignation. "Forget the responsibilities, the reality waiting outside this bookstore." Claire felt her throat tighten, knowing exactly what he meant, understanding all too clearly the boundary they both struggled to maintain. "I wish," she began, then stopped abruptly, fearing the vulnerability in her voice. Henry turned to face her fully, his eyes deeply searching hers. "What do you wish, Claire?" She hesitated, feeling her heart pound painfully, the careful restraint she'd maintained threatening to shatter under his gentle gaze. "I wish that life wasn't always so complicated," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible, the weight of her words hanging gently between them. He moved closer, their distance shrinking slowly, carefully. "I wish the same," he said, softly, fingers brushing lightly against hers, a hesitant touch filled with quiet meaning, leaving her breathless. After Henry left that evening, Claire found herself standing alone in the silent bookstore, overwhelmed by a deep, aching loneliness, unlike anything she'd felt before. She knew they were navigating dangerous waters, gently testing boundaries they'd always respected, yet the longing within her had grown too strong to ignore. In the quiet solitude of her bedroom later that night, Claire opened her wooden box, retrieving one of the letters she'd written years ago, words penned in lonely, evenings when her heart whispered secrets she couldn't voice aloud. Reading them again now, she saw clearly how much she'd denied herself, settling for quiet contentment rather than the vivid, aching truth of love. She traced her fingertips gently over the faded paper, understanding with painful clarity that she'd spent too many years quietly holding her heart back, carefully protecting herself from loss and disappointment. But what had her caution truly gained her, aside from silent regrets and unspoken dreams? Days passed slowly, autumn leaves drifting softly across sidewalks, marking time as Claire wrestled silently with her heart. She saw Henry less frequently, sensing he too needed space, needed time to reconcile the powerful feelings they'd unearthed. Their exchanges grew brief, restrained by unspoken fears, yet filled with gentle glances that spoke volumes. One afternoon, Abby returned home for a brief visit, sensing immediately her mother's quiet turmoil. Sitting together in the cozy bookstore, Abby gently placed her hand atop Claire's, her expression deeply understanding. "Mom, you've always taught me the importance of honesty," Abby began gently. "Isn't it time you allowed yourself the same?" Claire felt tears sting her eyes, the simplicity of her daughter's question piercing the careful defenses she'd constructed. "I don't know how to," she confessed softly, voice breaking gently. "What if speaking these feelings aloud destroys everything?" Abby smiled softly, wisdom beyond her years reflecting quietly in her eyes. "Or what if keeping them hidden destroys you first?" That evening, alone once more, Claire pondered Abby's gentle words, finally understanding the depth of the choice before her. Could she truly continue hiding her heart, accepting a life filled only with quiet yearning? Or did she dare risk everything, even heartbreak, for a chance to finally live openly and truthfully? The tension within her built quietly yet steadily, a gentle storm growing stronger beneath the surface of her carefully composed exterior. Finally, feeling a quiet resolve she'd never experienced before, Claire sat down at her desk and took out a blank sheet of paper. Her hands shook slightly as she began writing, allowing herself for once to openly acknowledge every secret longing, every quiet truth she'd buried deep inside. "Henry," she began softly, tears softly blurring her vision. "I've lived my life carefully, cautiously, fearing pain more than seeking joy. But I'm tired of silence, tired of pretending this love doesn't exist. I don't know what tomorrow holds, or if our timing will ever be right. But I can't live another day without saying openly what my heart has long whispered quietly to itself. Claire rode into the early hours, pouring every unspoken emotion into the letter, finally allowing her heart the freedom it had long denied itself. As she sealed the envelope, feeling both frightened and profoundly relieved, she knew this decision would forever alter the gentle stability of her life. Yet, despite the uncertainty ahead, her heart felt finally, blissfully alive. She hesitated briefly, breathing deeply as dawn gently illuminated the room, knowing she'd taken an irreversible step into the unknown. But as Claire placed the letter carefully into her bag, prepared to deliver it personally, a quiet calm settled over her heart. Perhaps, after a lifetime of silence, she'd finally found the courage to embrace love openly, even if it meant stepping bravely into uncertainty. Have you ever faced a moment when hiding your feelings felt more dangerous than sharing them openly? Claire woke before dawn on the day she knew her life would quietly shatter into two distinct halves, before the truth and after. Her bedroom was cloaked in shadows, the first hints of sunrise casting a pale amber glow across her pillow, highlighting the tired lines on her face. She lay still, her heart drumming an anxious rhythm beneath her ribs, her breathing shallow and hesitant. She knew what today meant. She knew that once she spoke the truth openly, there would be no returning to the comforting silence she'd hidden behind for so long. She rose slowly, her movements deliberate, as though prolonging these final moments of innocence might somehow protect her from the pain she knew was coming. The quiet creaking of the old wooden floors beneath her feet seemed amplified, echoing through the empty spaces of her small home. She dressed carefully, selecting clothes that felt comforting and familiar, wrapping herself in soft layers that provided an illusion of warmth against the chill growing inside her chest. When Claire finally stepped outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of the ocean mingled with fallen leaves. Her footsteps echoed softly on the deserted street as she made her way toward Henry's house, each step heavier than the last, burdened with fears she could no longer silence. In her purse, the letter she had poured her heart into rested quietly, the weight of her words more substantial than any physical burden. As she approached his door, Claire felt a quiet surge of anxiety, pausing to steady her breath before reaching out to knock. The soft sound echoed in her ears, and she waited with her heart in her throat, pulse racing, until the door opened gently, revealing Henry, his eyes widening briefly in surprise before softening into concern. "Claire," he said quietly, noticing, immediately, the tension in her posture. "Come in." She stepped inside, feeling oddly disconnected from the moment, as though watching herself move through a dream. Henry's home was calm and welcoming, filled with the scent of brewed coffee and books, comforting yet underscored by an indefinable sadness. They sat quietly in his living room, the gentle morning sunlight casting elongated shadows across the floor, leaving the air thick with unspoken questions. "I wrote this letter last night," Claire finally said softly, pulling it gently from her bag and placing it carefully on the coffee table between them. Her voice shook slightly, betraying the vulnerability she felt in this moment. "Everything I've held back for so long, I put it there." Henry gazed at the envelope, his expression unreadable for a long moment before he slowly lifted his eyes to meet hers. Instead of reaching for the letter, however, he let out a quiet sigh, leaning forward slightly, as though steeling himself against the difficulty of his next words. "Claire," he began softly, voice thick with quiet regret. "Before I read this, there's something you need to know, something that changes everything." She felt her heart tighten painfully, dread pooling in her stomach, sensing immediately that his revelation would overshadow everything she'd written. "What is it?" she asked gently, bracing herself. Henry looked away briefly, gathering himself, clearly struggling to find the words. I found out recently, my daughter is going through an incredibly difficult time. She's just had a baby, and she's struggling deeply. She asked me to move closer to help her, to be present, to support her. She needs me, Claire. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire felt her world gently tilt sideways, the fragile hopes she'd carried splintering quietly beneath the undeniable weight of Henry's truth. Her throat tightened painfully, tears welling behind her eyes, yet she fought to maintain control. So, you're leaving, she whispered, more a quiet acknowledgement than a question, her voice barely audible. Henry nodded slowly, sorrow etched deeply into every gentle line on his face. I am. I decided last night. I couldn't deny her, Claire, not when she needs me most. Claire's hands trembled quietly in her lap, the cold reality sinking deeply into her heart. The timing of their love, always imperfect, had finally run out. She felt helpless against the waves of regret and sadness that washed softly over her. I understand, she finally murmured, barely managing the words, feeling her composure slipping quietly away. You've always been a man of duty, Henry. I could never ask you to change that. He reached across the table, taking her shaking hands gently into his own, his touch warm and reassuring despite the heartbreaking distance now looming between them. Claire, please believe me, Henry whispered earnestly, eyes glistening softly. I never wanted to hurt you. Loving you has quietly been the greatest and most painful secret of my life. Claire let out a trembling breath, the tears finally slipping free, silently tracing down her cheeks. She looked deeply into Henry's eyes, understanding profoundly that their love had always existed in the quiet spaces between what was and what could never be. Henry, she whispered painfully, her voice thick with emotion. Loving you has been both my greatest joy and deepest sorrow, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. They sat quietly, each absorbing the truth they'd finally spoken aloud, feeling the bittersweet beauty of honesty mingled with inevitable loss. Finally, Claire rose to her feet, knowing it was time to leave, time to let him go, despite how deeply it broke her heart. Henry stood slowly, his movements careful, and drew her into a gentle embrace, wrapping her softly in his arms. She rested, her head against his chest, listening quietly to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, memorizing its comforting sound. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary now, the silence between them filled with everything they'd already shared. Eventually, Claire stepped away gently, meeting Henry's eyes one last time, quietly acknowledging their shared truth. As she walked toward the door, every step felt agonizingly final, marking the quiet end of something fragile and beautiful. At the threshold, she turned back softly. Henry stood quietly in the gentle morning light, watching her with a quiet sadness she'd carry forever. She whispered gently, her voice breaking, "Goodbye, Henry." "Goodbye, Claire," he replied softly, his voice barely audible, yet deeply sincere, heavy with the weight of 1,000 unspoken possibilities. Claire stepped quietly out into the morning, the world around her unchanged, yet somehow entirely different. She walked slowly homeward, each step a gentle, painful farewell, her heart heavy yet profoundly grateful for the brief, quiet miracle of their love. In the bookstore later that day, Claire sat alone among her beloved books, surrounded by stories of love and loss. She felt a quiet peace mingled with her deep sorrow, understanding profoundly that their story, though painful, had been true and honest, finally spoken openly despite the heartbreaking timing. As evening fell gently across the quiet town, Claire understood deeply that some loves were meant to quietly mark our souls rather than fill our lives. And though the quiet sadness within her would remain always, She knew now that it was tempered by the beauty of a love sincerely felt, truthfully shared, and gently released. Have you ever had to quietly say goodbye to a love that changed you forever, knowing it was the only right choice left to make? Claire walked slowly down the empty street, the weight of her goodbye pressing heavily upon her chest. Each step took an eternity, and yet each brought her no closer to the peace she desperately craved. The morning air seemed colder now, penetrating, deeply beneath her thin coat, seeping into her bones and matching the chill of heartbreak she carried inside. It was a loneliness far greater than any she'd known before, profound and quiet, existing in the space that Henry had briefly filled and left painfully empty. As she approached Whispering Pages, the bookstore that had always represented refuge, sanctuary, and comfort, now seemed strangely distant, almost alien. Claire paused on the threshold, her hand resting lightly upon the familiar handle, unable to bring herself to open the door immediately. The gentle chime above, always cheerful, felt mocking now, a cruel reminder of happier moments that could never return. Taking a slow breath, she finally pushed the door open and stepped inside, the quiet store enveloping her in silence. She moved through the aisles, fingertips brushing softly against the spines of the books, seeking reassurance from their quiet wisdom. Her heart, heavy with loss, sought answers among stories she'd trusted her entire life, yet none seemed able to ease the quiet anguish she carried. She found herself pausing by the poetry shelf, pulling down a worn copy of Neruda's poems, the familiar pages now seeming impossibly fragile beneath her trembling fingertips. Settling into the old leather chair near the window, she opened the book randomly, desperate for distraction, hoping its gentle verses could soothe the ache within. But the first lines she read seemed cruelly appropriate, speaking softly of lost love, quiet yearning, and memories that lingered painfully, long after farewells had been whispered. She closed the book gently, tears burning softly behind her eyes, blurring the ink into meaningless shapes. Outside, autumn leaves spiraled gently in the soft breeze, their quiet descent echoing the slow breaking of her heart. Claire leaned back, closing her eyes as she allowed herself, for the first time since leaving Henry's house, to fully feel the depth of her sorrow. Silent tears slipped gently down her cheeks, tracing paths she'd long suppressed, releasing the grief she'd hidden behind careful smiles and restrained words. Her mind drifted gently back to every interaction they'd shared, every lingering look, every cautious conversation. Each memory carried its own quiet sting, revealing clearly now how deeply she'd allowed herself to fall, despite knowing the risk, despite understanding that the timing would never allow their love to flourish fully. Yet even now, drowning quietly in her sadness, Claire could not bring herself to regret the vulnerability she'd finally embraced. Henry had awakened something profound within her, had reminded her what it truly meant to feel alive, even if briefly, even if quietly. As afternoon light slipped softly through the bookstore's dusty windows, casting long golden beams across the worn wooden floors, Claire allowed herself a quiet smile, tinged deeply with sadness, yet beautiful in its honesty. She understood profoundly now that love, even when painful, even when impossible, was never something to regret. It was the quiet pulse beneath her existence, the gentle reminder of her capacity to feel deeply, authentically, humanly. Slowly rising from her seat, Claire returned the poetry book to its place, fingertips lingering softly against its cover. Thanking it silently for the quiet understanding it had offered her, she moved through the store, breathing deeply, allowing each familiar scent, the ink, aged paper, the faint lavender from next door, to soothe her gently. Each breath steadied her slightly, grounding her in the quiet strength she'd always carried, but rarely acknowledged. Reaching the front desk, Claire carefully straightened her shoulders, feeling a quiet resolve settle softly within her chest. She knew life would carry her forward from this heartbreak, slowly, gently, perhaps never entirely healing, but she would move forward nonetheless, carrying Henry quietly within her heart, their love a treasured secret she would hold close, always. She reached into her purse and gently withdrew the letter she'd written, still sealed, its words now forever unread by Henry, yet profoundly important to her. Carefully, tenderly, she opened it, rereading each sentence, allowing the depth of her emotions to wash gently over her again. Then, quietly and deliberately, she placed the letter beneath the counter, hidden safely among her most cherished belongings, understanding that these words, though never shared, represented the truest and bravest part of her soul. Evening approached softly, the sky outside deepening into rich shades of purple and indigo, matching the gentle melancholy Claire now accepted as part of herself. She turned the small sign in the window to closed, signaling the quiet end to another chapter, not only in the day, but also in her heart. The quiet bookstore embraced her softly as she sat again by the window, gazing thoughtfully out into the quiet street, gently accepting the bittersweet reality of love found and lost, cherished and released. And as darkness settled quietly over Cape Elizabeth, Claire understood deeply that sometimes the greatest loves, the most profound connections, were those quietly honored from afar, loved without possession, remembered without bitterness, and cherished quietly, tenderly, forever. Have you ever quietly loved someone from afar, carrying them in your heart long after you've said goodbye? In the weeks following Henry's departure, Claire felt as though the world had quietly shifted beneath her feet, settling into a new reality that she was powerless to resist. Every day began in muted stillness, her room cloaked in gentle shadows. As she woke to the familiar yet hollow echo of the radio, its soft hum filling the empty spaces Henry had briefly illuminated, she lay there listening without truly hearing, her heart wrapped in a numbness that seemed protective yet was deeply suffocating. Life in Cape Elizabeth continued its quiet rhythm unchanged. Neighbors greeted her with polite nods and gentle smiles, their eyes occasionally searching hers with subtle curiosity. Claire responded instinctively, offering the careful expressions of calm and stability she'd mastered so well over the years. Yet beneath her composed exterior, she felt quietly disconnected. Conversations became softly perfunctory, laughter grew scarce, replaced by polite chuckles that never quite reached her eyes. At Whispering Pages, customers still wandered in, seeking familiar comforts from beloved stories, their voices warm and gently enthusiastic. Claire engaged them with quiet courtesy, her movements precise yet mechanical as she rang up purchases, carefully wrapped gifts, and made gentle recommendations. Her smiles remained polite, her words soft and well-chosen, yet each interaction left her silently drained, a subtle reminder of how much effort it took to maintain this gentle facade. Even the store itself, once her haven, now held quiet echoes of Henry that she couldn't ignore. Each book he had touched, each aisle they'd once shared in quiet conversation, every small memory embedded within its walls felt impossibly heavy. When alone, Claire would find herself unconsciously drifting toward the poetry section, fingertips grazing gently over spines they'd discussed, each title whispering quiet reminders of possibilities never realized. One afternoon, as she tidied the shelves, she discovered a bookmark he'd left behind, hidden quietly between the pages of a volume he'd returned weeks earlier. It was a simple strip of pale cardstock, slightly worn at the edges from frequent use, yet the subtle weight of its presence struck Claire profoundly. She held it gently, running her thumb over its surface, her chest tightening softly as memories flooded back. His quiet voice recommending verses, his gentle laugh at her playful teasing, the brief warmth in his eyes that had revealed so much, without words. Returning the bookmark carefully to the shelf, Claire stepped back, feeling quietly overwhelmed. Small objects now held enormous emotional power, each gentle reminder of Henry's fleeting presence in her life amplified by his absence. She felt trapped by her choices, by the quiet silence she'd chosen, by words left unsaid, and moments left unlived. As autumn deepened into winter, Claire's routines remained gently unchanged outwardly, but inwardly she felt herself withdrawing, slowly from the vibrant threads of life around her. Her evenings became quiet rituals of solitude, tea prepared carefully in a single cup, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders as she sat by the window, watching darkness settle softly over the town. It was during these moments of stillness that she felt most acutely the quiet weight of what had been lost, of chances she had quietly allowed to slip away. One evening, while arranging her tea things, she reached automatically for the second cup she'd always reserved quietly for Henry during his visits, only to pause mid-motion, her fingers gently trembling at the realization. She held it there, suspended in quiet contemplation, the porcelain cool and delicate beneath her touch, a gentle reminder of absence rather than companionship. Slowly, tenderly, she placed it back on the shelf, empty and unused, a quiet acknowledgement of permanence now imposed by silence. The following days brought snowfall, blanketing Cape Elizabeth in quiet beauty, muffling sound and accentuating Claire's isolation. Standing by the bookstore's window, she watched the gentle drift of snowflakes, their slow descent an echo of her own heart's quiet sinking into acceptance. Customers became fewer, conversations briefer, each interaction reminding her subtly, yet painfully of what she'd quietly surrendered. One particularly cold morning, Claire opened a drawer beneath the store's register to find a forgotten photograph tucked quietly among receipts and pens. A candid snapshot of herself that Henry had taken months earlier. She studied it quietly, her face captured in a rare, genuine moment of joy as she laughed softly at something he'd said off camera. The warmth in her eyes startled her, a stark contrast to the woman she saw now reflected quietly in the store's windows. Claire gently tucked the photograph into her pocket, carrying it quietly throughout the day, fingers occasionally brushing its edges as though drawing comfort from a past self she hardly recognized. That night, alone by the fire, she retrieved the image once more, studying it in silence, feeling profoundly the quiet tragedy of losing not just Henry, but the version of herself he'd briefly awakened. Her quiet reflections extended late into the night, the gentle ticking of the mantelpiece clock softly marking the slow passage of time. She moved quietly through her home, noticing anew the quiet details she'd long taken for granted. A jacket he'd once draped over a chair, now neatly folded away. Books he'd recommended, gathering gentle layers of dust, their pages unturned since his departure. Claire stood silently in her kitchen, the faint scent of tea leaves and lavender drifting softly around her. She reached instinctively for the kettle, pausing as her gaze settled once more upon the two teacups, one routinely used, one quietly waiting, untouched. Without conscious decision, she took down Henry's cup once more, setting it softly on the counter, filling it gently with steaming tea, though she knew he would never return to share it. She stood quietly beside the counter, gazing at the solitary cup as steam rose softly, dissipating into the air, a gentle metaphor for the quiet dissolution of hope, the subtle vanishing of dreams she'd allowed to linger unspoken. There were no tears, only quiet recognition of the profound and gentle sadness filling her heart, an ache born not from dramatic tragedy, but from quiet choices she'd made again and again, each rooted in cautious silence and fear. As dawn approached, the tea grew cold, untouched. Claire carefully poured it away, watching quietly as it disappeared down the drain, symbolic of so much more than mere tea. She rinsed the cup gently, placing it back upon the shelf, now fully understanding that some emptiness would remain, quietly, permanent, within her heart. Yet even as sorrow settled softly into permanence, a quiet resilience stirred gently within her. Claire recognized now the subtle power of acknowledgement. the quiet strength found in accepting sadness without succumbing entirely to despair. Life would continue. Quieter, perhaps, changed inevitably by choices made and silences maintained. But it would continue nonetheless. Stepping softly toward the window, Claire watched dawn break quietly over snow-covered streets, the pale morning light offering gentle hope amidst lingering shadows. She understood now, clearly and profoundly, that her quiet tragedy was not just loss, but the recognition of having loved deeply, if silently, of having lived authentically, even in quiet resignation. And though sadness lingered softly, persistent yet quiet, it was tempered now by acceptance, by the quiet courage of living forward despite what was lost. Standing silently at the window, Claire felt a gentle peace settle softly within her heart. Not the peace born of resolution, but rather of quiet acknowledgement. Her life would bear subtle scars, quiet reminders of love found and lost, cherished yet ultimately released. But she knew deeply that even quiet tragedy held profound meaning. That love experienced quietly, even in loss, carried its own gentle beauty, forever shaping the quiet strength of her soul. Winter gradually began to yield, softening into the quiet promise of spring. Claire had grown accustomed to the gentle solitude of her days, filling each hour with quiet routines and carefully maintained rituals. Her bookstore remained a haven, quiet and predictable, though the subtle ache within her heart persisted gently beneath her calm exterior. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through the window, illuminating the dust particles suspended, in the air the postman arrived quietly, waving cheerfully as he always did. Claire returned his greeting with practiced warmth, accepting the small stack of mail, mostly invoices and publisher catalogs, with gentle resignation. However, nestled within the ordinary envelopes was a smaller, pale blue envelope, its handwriting instantly recognizable, causing her breath to catch softly. Claire's pulse quickened gently as she turned the envelope carefully in her hands, recognizing the neat script. Henry's handwriting, deliberate and precise, unmistakably familiar. A quiet confusion settled over her as she moved slowly to the back room, carefully closing the door behind her, needing solitude to process whatever lay inside this unexpected letter. She eased herself into the worn armchair, fingers trembling subtly as she carefully opened the envelope. The single sheet of paper slipped gently into her hands, the texture soft and fragile beneath her touch. Claire took a slow breath, bracing herself gently as she unfolded it, eyes scanning quietly over the carefully penned lines. Dear Claire, I've spent countless days struggling with how best to share this truth with you, wrestling quietly with what it might mean for us both. I hoped, perhaps selfishly, that silence would spare us further pain. But silence has brought only distance and regret. Claire paused briefly, feeling the gentle sincerity in each carefully chosen word, her heart quickening with cautious hope. As she continued reading, the night before I left, as I was packing, my daughter called me in tears. She confessed something I'd never expected, a secret she'd kept hidden out of love, believing she was protecting my happiness. She knew about you, Claire. She saw how I changed after meeting you, recognizing something in me she'd never seen before, real joy, quiet yet profound. My daughter feared, wrongly yet understandably, that if I chose my own happiness, I might somehow abandon her or disrupt our family. Claire's heart tightened gently, the letter trembling softly in her grip. As she absorbed Henry's quiet revelation, a gentle sadness filled her at the thought of his daughter's fear, recognizing the quiet complexity of love and loyalty, duty and desire. Henry continued gently, each word written carefully, yet filled with deep, heartfelt honesty. She admitted, she exaggerated her struggles. Claire, her need for me to move permanently was born of fear, not necessity. I understand her actions. Love can sometimes compel us to do irrational things, especially when we're afraid. But this truth changes everything. I've been living here, caring for my daughter and grandchild, yet knowing quietly that my place is not entirely here, nor entirely there, with you. And so, I've wrestled deeply with myself, with my obligations and desires. Claire's breathing became uneven, heart pounding softly yet insistently, each sentence reshaping the gentle, quiet narrative she'd accepted as final. Henry's words gently unveiled truths she'd never dared consider, possibilities still quietly alive, fragile yet undeniably real. I cannot ask you to wait for me, Claire. I have no right to ask anything more after all we've endured. But I want you to know the full truth. I never left because I stopped loving you. Quite the opposite. My love has only deepened, becoming quietly central to who I am. If there is even the smallest chance that your heart remains open, that your love remains quietly, patiently alive, I will return. I will come home, Claire, to you. Claire lowered the letter softly, heart racing, the gentle silence around her suddenly vibrant, humming quietly with newfound possibility. Each word resonated gently yet powerfully, transforming months of quiet, resignation into cautious hope. The weight of silence she'd carried felt lighter, replaced now by a quiet determination, fragile yet undeniable, to reclaim what had nearly slipped permanently from her grasp. Days passed quietly, yet restlessly. Henry's letter carried gently in her pocket, a constant, reassuring presence. She moved through her routines with newfound clarity, quietly preparing for a possibility she'd never dared hope for. Her heart gradually softened, the persistent ache fading gently into a tender anticipation, a quiet strength she recognized as love, enduring, patient, gently resilient. Finally, one softly bright morning, Claire sat down to reply, pen poised. Carefully over paper, heart quiet yet resolute, each word chosen thoughtfully, gently conveying the depth of her feelings. Henry, your letter has quietly changed everything. For so long, I believed silence was safest, that hiding my heart was the only choice. But I understand now that silence brought only loss. You taught me to love gently yet fearlessly, to accept the quiet complexities of our lives. If your heart remains willing, if our story can still find its quiet place within this complicated world, I am here, Henry, waiting quietly, lovingly, for you. She sealed the envelope gently, placing it carefully on her desk, heart quiet yet fiercely hopeful. The quiet rhythm of life resumed, but now filled with subtle anticipation, an unspoken countdown toward a possibility once thought lost. Days blended quietly into weeks, yet Claire remained patiently hopeful. Each morning, she glanced softly out the window, searching quietly for any sign of change, heart quietly expectant yet prepared for whatever truth awaited. Customers visited, books were sold, life moved gently forward. Yet beneath it all, Claire waited, quietly determined, her love a soft, persistent whisper within her soul. And then, one quiet afternoon, the gentle chime above the bookstore door sounded softly, familiar, yet somehow charged with new meaning. Claire turned slowly, heart quickening as she recognized Henry standing quietly in the doorway, hesitant yet hopeful, eyes filled gently with quiet emotion. They stood silently for a gentle moment, the space between them quietly charged with unspoken truths and quiet yearning. Finally, Henry stepped forward carefully, crossing the small distance separating them, each gentle step bringing him quietly closer, until at last they stood face to face, their eyes communicating quietly everything words had never fully captured. "You came," Claire whispered softly, her voice barely audible yet filled gently with quiet joy, relief, and tentative hope. Henry nodded gently, his eyes tender and sincere, voice soft yet deeply resonant. "How could I not? You've quietly become my home, Claire. Leaving was the greatest mistake of my life, but perhaps returning can be my greatest truth. She smiled softly, heart overflowing with quiet gratitude and profound relief. The gentle tragedy they'd both carried for so long now reshaped softly into something tender, hopeful, quietly resilient. Claire reached out slowly, fingertips brushing gently against his cheek, reassuring herself quietly that he was real, present, finally within reach. "I thought we'd lost our chance forever," she murmured gently, voice trembling softly with emotion. "I thought our silence had cost us everything." Henry carefully took her hand, holding it tenderly between his own, eyes quietly reassuring. "Our silence cost us deeply, Claire. But perhaps it also taught us how precious this quiet truth truly is. Our story isn't lost. It was merely waiting patiently, quietly, for us to be brave enough to claim it." They stood quietly together, gentle sunlight enveloping them softly, illuminating the quiet beauty of second chances born of quiet courage and enduring love. Each subtle glance, gentle touch, quiet breath now carried profound meaning, a quiet testament to love patiently held, gently preserved, and finally claimed openly, honestly, softly yet undeniably. In that quiet embrace, Claire understood profoundly that love, even when complicated by silence and circumstance, could find its gentle way home. Their quiet journey had been long, painful, filled with subtle loss. Yet in this gentle reunion, it became clear that even the quietest truths, softly revealed, could rewrite endings once believed permanent, offering quiet redemption and profound, gentle joy. Spring arrived gently in Cape Elizabeth, carrying subtle promises of renewal that whispered softly through budding branches and delicate blossoms. The town seemed to awaken slowly, as though cautiously emerging from a long, quiet slumber. Claire, too, felt herself gently awakening. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually and quietly, each passing day carrying her softly forward, away from the shadows she'd quietly inhabited for so long. Henry's return had subtly transformed her world, yet life remained gently complicated. They took careful steps forward, mindful of past hurts, respectful of scars that lingered quietly beneath the surface. Their reunion was tender yet cautious, their conversations gentle yet deliberate, acknowledging truths softly spoken and pain gently endured. Claire found comfort in their quiet honesty. There was no illusion of perfection, no rush toward reckless declarations. Instead, there existed a profound gratitude for second chances quietly earned. Days passed softly into weeks, weeks quietly becoming months. Claire and Henry shared small, gentle moments together, walks along the beach at twilight, quiet conversations. Over tea in her bookstore, peaceful evenings spent reading side by side. Yet they maintained separate homes, separate lives gently intertwined, yet carefully respected, each acknowledging quietly the boundaries that love alone couldn't instantly erase. Their relationship evolved gently, built upon quiet gestures and sincere intentions, offering comfort without expectation, companionship without possession. Claire still carried quiet scars from her years of solitude, understanding deeply that love didn't erase loss, it merely softened it, provided quiet spaces within which healing could gently occur. Her days at Whispering Pages remained quietly fulfilling, the bookstore her sanctuary, each carefully arranged shelf a quiet testament to her resilience and quiet strength. Henry visited often, each interaction tender yet reserved, both aware that their love, though deeply genuine, required gentle nurturing, patient tending, quiet acceptance of imperfections and subtle limitations. One afternoon, while reorganizing the poetry shelves, Claire discovered a small slip of paper hidden gently between pages of a well-loved anthology. It was Henry's handwriting, simple yet profoundly meaningful, a quiet message left to find at precisely the right moment. Our story isn't perfect, Claire, but it's real, and that's quietly enough. She smiled gently, holding the paper, carefully to her chest, understanding deeply the subtle truth he had conveyed. Real love didn't require grand gestures or loud proclamations. It thrived quietly, tenderly, in the careful spaces between two people who understood and accepted one another's quiet truths. Slowly, Claire began to embrace her new reality, one where quiet hope mingled softly with cautious realism. She understood deeply that happiness wasn't a destination reached suddenly, but a quiet state carefully maintained through gentle effort, patient understanding, quiet forgiveness of oneself and others. Her heart, once quietly guarded, now gently opened, not fully perhaps, but enough to allow quiet joy and genuine love to enter softly, tenderly, irrevocably. Life continued quietly, gently reshaped by their subtle reunion. Henry found his own careful balance, spending time regularly with his family while maintaining a gentle presence in Claire's life. They shared quiet dreams, subtle hopes for the future, accepting gently that not every dream required immediate fulfillment. Some could remain gently held, quietly cherished, patiently nurtured without urgency. One evening, as summer approached softly, Claire stood quietly by the window of whispering pages, watching dusk gently settle over the town. The quiet streets were bathed in soft amber light, peaceful yet filled with quiet promise. Henry appeared quietly at her side, his presence gently comforting, their silence shared easily, filled softly with unspoken understanding. "It's strange, isn't it?" she whispered softly, not needing to clarify, certain he understood exactly what she meant. Henry nodded gently, eyes gazing quietly out the window. Life rarely unfolds the way we imagine, but perhaps that's the gentle beauty of it. Claire smiled softly, heart quietly content, yet tinged with gentle melancholy, knowing deeply that love, even when found, carried quiet reminders of past losses, lingering regrets, gentle uncertainties. Yet within this quiet imperfection existed profound beauty. The gentle reality of two imperfect hearts, quietly choosing love despite the complexity, despite the gentle ache of bittersweet memories. They stood quietly together, as darkness gently deepened outside, their reflection softly mirrored in the glass, symbolic of lives quietly intertwined, yet gently distinct. Claire felt deeply that this moment encapsulated everything they'd learned: the quiet courage of loving openly, the gentle strength of holding space for past hurts without resentment, the profound beauty of accepting love exactly as it was, imperfect, quiet, gently complicated, yet beautifully real. "Are you happy, Claire?" Henry finally asked quietly, voice gentle yet deeply sincere. Claire considered the question softly, understanding deeply that happiness wasn't absolute, but a quiet choice made gently each day, each moment, each breath. She turned slowly toward him, meeting his eyes softly, honesty quietly present in her gaze. "Yes," she whispered gently, not in a perfect way, but in a quiet, meaningful, real way. "I wouldn't trade this quiet truth for anything." Henry reached quietly for her hand, holding it tenderly, their fingers gently intertwined. "Neither would I." As night quietly fell over Cape Elizabeth, Claire felt a quiet peace settle gently within her heart. Not the peace of resolution, but the gentle acceptance of life's quiet complexities, the bittersweet beauty of love found and lost, and gently reclaimed. She understood profoundly that their quiet ending wasn't a conclusion, but simply another chapter gently unfolding, beautifully incomplete, yet profoundly meaningful. Long after Henry had quietly returned to his own home, Claire remained by the window. Her reflection softly illuminated in the dim bookstore lights. She understood clearly that love didn't require loud declarations or perfect resolutions. Its quiet presence was enough. gentle yet powerful, bittersweet yet deeply sustaining. Claire gently smiled into the quiet darkness, accepting softly that her life would forever carry subtle scars, reminders not just of what had been lost, but also of what had been quietly gained. Their love was neither perfect nor conventional, yet it was real, gentle, quietly enduring. In this bittersweet truth lay profound meaning, an acceptance of life's quiet imperfections, love's gentle complexities, and the quiet courage required to embrace both fully. Standing quietly by the window, Claire felt gently hopeful, not with the naive optimism of youth, but with the quiet resilience of someone who'd loved, lost, and chosen gently to love again. Her story, gently imperfect, yet profoundly authentic, continued quietly onward, each gentle moment cherished, each subtle happiness quietly embraced. As night deepened softly around her, Claire whispered gently into the quiet darkness, a quiet acknowledgement of love softly lived, bittersweet, yet deeply beautiful. Perhaps the most profound loves aren't those that end perfectly, but those we quietly choose, despite imperfection, gently, bravely, fully. Have you ever experienced a love quietly profound, imperfect, yet deeply beautiful? Subscribe and join me as we explore more stories of second chances, quiet courage, and love found gently yet profoundly. Spring arrived gently in Cape Elizabeth, carrying subtle promises of renewal that whispered softly through budding branches and delicate blossoms. The town seemed to awaken slowly, as though cautiously emerging from a long, quiet slumber. Claire, too, felt herself gently awakening. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually and quietly, each passing day carrying her softly forward, away from the shadows she'd quietly inhabited for so long. Henry's return had subtly transformed her world, yet life remained gently complicated. They took careful steps forward, mindful of past hurts, respectful of scars that lingered quietly beneath the surface. Their reunion was tender yet cautious, their conversations gentle yet deliberate, acknowledging truths softly spoken and pain gently endured. Claire found comfort in their quiet honesty. There was no illusion of perfection, no rush toward reckless declarations. Instead, there existed a profound gratitude for second chances quietly earned. Days passed softly into weeks, weeks quietly becoming months. Claire and Henry shared small, gentle moments together, walks along the beach at twilight, quiet conversations. Over tea in her bookstore, peaceful evenings spent reading side by side. Yet they maintained separate homes, separate lives gently intertwined, yet carefully respected, each acknowledging quietly the boundaries that love alone couldn't instantly erase. Their relationship evolved gently, built upon quiet gestures and sincere intentions, offering comfort without expectation, companionship without possession. Claire still carried quiet scars from her years of solitude, understanding deeply that love didn't erase loss, it merely softened it, provided quiet spaces within which healing could gently occur. Her days at Whispering Pages remained quietly fulfilling, the bookstore her sanctuary, each carefully arranged shelf a quiet testament to her resilience and quiet strength. Henry visited often, each interaction tender yet reserved, both aware that their love, though deeply genuine, required gentle nurturing, patient tending, quiet acceptance of imperfections and subtle limitations. One afternoon, while reorganizing the poetry shelves, Claire discovered a small slip of paper hidden gently between pages of a well-loved anthology. It was Henry's handwriting, simple yet profoundly meaningful, a quiet message left to find at precisely the right moment. Our story isn't perfect, Claire, but it's real, and that's quietly enough. She smiled gently, holding the paper, carefully to her chest, understanding deeply the subtle truth he had conveyed. Real love didn't require grand gestures or loud proclamations. It thrived quietly, tenderly, in the careful spaces between two people who understood and accepted one another's quiet truths. Slowly, Claire began to embrace her new reality, one where quiet hope mingled softly with cautious realism. She understood deeply that happiness wasn't a destination reached suddenly, but a quiet state carefully maintained through gentle effort, patient understanding, quiet forgiveness of oneself and others. Her heart, once quietly guarded, now gently opened, not fully perhaps, but enough to allow quiet joy and genuine love to enter softly, tenderly, irrevocably. Life continued quietly, gently reshaped by their subtle reunion. Henry found his own careful balance, spending time regularly with his family while maintaining a gentle presence in Claire's life. They shared quiet dreams, subtle hopes for the future, accepting gently that not every dream required immediate fulfillment. Some could remain gently held, quietly cherished, patiently nurtured without urgency. One evening, as summer approached softly, Claire stood quietly by the window of Whispering Pages, watching dusk gently settle over the town. The quiet streets were bathed in soft amber light, peaceful yet filled with quiet promise. Henry appeared quietly at her side, his presence gently comforting, their silence shared easily, filled softly with unspoken understanding. "It's strange, isn't it?" she whispered softly, not needing to clarify, certain he understood exactly what she meant. Henry nodded gently, eyes gazing quietly out the window. Life rarely unfolds the way we imagine, but perhaps that's the gentle beauty of it. Claire smiled softly, heart quietly content, yet tinged with gentle melancholy, knowing deeply that love, even when found, carried quiet reminders of past losses, lingering regrets, gentle uncertainties. Yet within this quiet imperfection existed profound beauty. The gentle reality of two imperfect hearts, quietly choosing love despite the complexity, despite the gentle ache of bittersweet memories. They stood quietly together, as darkness gently deepened outside, their reflection softly mirrored in the glass, symbolic of lives quietly intertwined, yet gently distinct. Claire felt deeply that this moment encapsulated everything they'd learned: the quiet courage of loving openly, the gentle strength of holding space for past hurts without resentment, the profound beauty of accepting love exactly as it was, imperfect, quiet, gently complicated, yet beautifully real. "Are you happy, Claire?" Henry finally asked quietly, voice gentle yet deeply sincere. Claire considered the question softly, understanding deeply that happiness wasn't absolute, but a quiet choice made gently each day, each moment, each breath. She turned slowly toward him, meeting his eyes softly, honesty quietly present in her gaze. "Yes," she whispered gently, not in a perfect way, but in a quiet, meaningful, real way. "I wouldn't trade this quiet truth for anything." Henry reached quietly for her hand, holding it tenderly, their fingers gently intertwined. "Neither would I." As night quietly fell over Cape Elizabeth, Claire felt a quiet peace settle gently within her heart. Not the peace of resolution, but the gentle acceptance of life's quiet complexities, the bittersweet beauty of love found and lost, and gently reclaimed. She understood profoundly that their quiet ending wasn't a conclusion, but simply another chapter gently unfolding, beautifully incomplete, yet profoundly meaningful. Long after Henry had quietly returned to his own home, Claire remained by the window, her reflection softly illuminated in the dim bookstore lights. She understood clearly that love didn't require loud declarations or perfect resolutions. Its quiet presence was enough, gentle yet powerful, bittersweet yet deeply sustaining. Claire gently smiled into the quiet darkness, accepting softly that her life would forever carry subtle scars, reminders not just of what had been lost, but also of what had been quietly gained. Their love was neither perfect nor conventional, Yet it was real, gentle, quietly enduring. In this bittersweet truth lay profound meaning, an acceptance of life's quiet imperfections, love's gentle complexities, and the quiet courage required to embrace both fully. Standing quietly by the window, Claire felt gently hopeful, not with the naive optimism of youth, but with the quiet resilience of someone who'd loved, lost, and chosen gently to love again. Her story, gently imperfect, yet profoundly authentic, continued quietly onward, each gentle moment cherished, each subtle happiness quietly embraced. As night deepened softly around her, Claire whispered gently into the quiet darkness, a quiet acknowledgement of love softly lived, bittersweet, yet deeply beautiful. Perhaps the most profound loves aren't those that end perfectly, but those we quietly choose, despite imperfection, gently, bravely, fully. Have you ever experienced a love quietly profound, imperfect, yet deeply beautiful? Subscribe and join me as we explore more stories of second chances, quiet courage, and love found gently yet profoundly.